Welcome back here to Live Now from Fox. I'm Andrew Kraft. We want to move into more of these other top headlines today, including some of the international ones, especially out of the Middle East. The war, unfortunately, back on there. The Israel-Hamas conflict is now brewing, and the status quo might be back after phase one of the ceasefire was over. Phase two never got off the ground. Well, what does this new phase of the war look like? Fox News' Trey Yingst with more from Tel Aviv.
Overnight, Israel went back to war against Hamas, launching dozens of airstrikes throughout the Gaza Strip. Massive explosions rocked major population centers, killing hundreds. Among the dead are reported to be numerous senior Hamas officials, but we also know that many are civilians.
People are sleeping peacefully and they don't wake up, and the injured find they have lost their mothers and daughters.
The question now is if this will continue. National Security Council spokesman Brian Hughes said in a statement, quote, Hamas could have released hostages to extend the ceasefire, but instead chose refusal and war. That's a reference to Hamas declining to accept a ceasefire proposal put forward by the Trump administration.
Hamas rejected two concrete mediation proposals presented by the U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff.
And right now, there are indications that Israel could be preparing to enter Gaza on the ground. Evacuation orders were given Monday morning, with the IDF releasing a map for Palestinians to leave the entirety of the Gaza border area. Israeli officials are telling Hamas if they want the offensive to stop, they need to release the remaining hostages. Israel clearly changing their negotiation tactics here.
From the beginning, this looks and feels different, and I think that the preparations in Israel are for a very different type of military campaign.
The Israeli Security Cabinet will meet on Thursday night to discuss the new offensive in Gaza. In Tel Aviv, Trey Yingst, Fox News.
Trey, thanks so much. Back out live there to our shot, looking into the Gaza Strip from southern Israel. This was the message from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu today. Let's listen.
Hamas is responsible for this war. It invaded our towns, murdered our people, raped our women, and kidnapped our loved ones. Hamas refused offer after offer to release our hostages. In the past 2 weeks, Israel did not initiate any military action in the hope that Hamas would change course. Well, that didn't happen. While Israel accepted the offer of President Trump's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, Hamas flatly refused to do so. And this is why I authorized yesterday the renewal of military action against Hamas. Israel does not target Palestinian civilians. We target Hamas terrorists. And when these terrorists embed themselves in civilian areas, when they use civilians as human shields, they're the ones who are responsible for all unintended casualties. Palestinian civilians should avoid any contact with Hamas terrorists. And I call on the people of Gaza, get out of harm's way, move to safer areas. Because every civilian casualty is a tragedy. And every civilian casualty is the fault of Hamas. I thank President Trump for his unwavering support for Israel. Our alliance with the United States has never been stronger. To those who criticize Israel, I ask, what would you do if terrorists murdered and kidnapped your children? You would do what we are doing. In the face of pure evil, free societies have no choice but to fight. So I want to assure all our friends around the world, Israel will fight and Israel will win. We will bring our people home and we will destroy Hamas. We will not relent until we achieve all these vital goals. And we will not rest until we give our country a future of peace, prosperity, and hope.
All right, Prime Minister Netanyahu there with a stern message to Hamas. Also, his office putting this photo out today saying he held a security assessment today at the Kiryah with Defense Minister Israel Katz and the heads of the security establishment here. Well, let's talk about this new phase of the war now that the ceasefire is over. We're going to do that with our friends there at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, including Ben Cohen. He joins me Ben, good to see you here. You and I have talked about this for so long. You know, what would the negotiations going into phase 2 look like? Would we ever get to phase 2 of this ceasefire? And that really kind of gray area of why the ceasefire was holding, even though de facto phase 1 was over. Now it seems like all those questions are out the window. Are we back to status quo of war?
Well, Andrew, good to be with you. And yes, we did discuss that. And I think I remember telling you that I was skeptical that phase 1 would make it into phase 2. Whether we're back to square one, that's an interesting question. I think what has happened in the last few weeks is that Hamas has been tested with regard to its resolve and its willingness to negotiate. They've had several opportunities in the last few weeks to release the hostages of their own volition. There are still 59 hostages in Gaza, 24 of whom are believed to still be alive. And they didn't do that. Witkoff, Trump's envoy, who Prime Minister Netanyahu was talking about just now, actually gave them 2 separate proposals. Both of those were turned down. So I think that faced with a situation where Hamas is not releasing hostages and it's regrouping its fighters inside Gaza, Israel's reached the decision to resume the war.
But I ask why it is different this time around, because I could tell in the language and the rhetoric, the renewed sense of urgency of giving everything Israel has against Hamas. Did you notice that change in language? Was that always waiting in the wings, on the table, in the event that this did happen, that this was inevitable, according to the Israelis, that they never thought they were going to get to phase 2?
I think there was always significant doubt in Israel that phase 2 would be reached. And in fact, what you have with this ceasefire that was agreed in January are 3 distinct phases, all of which last about 6 weeks. But they only actually agreed a general outline for the next 2 phases because obviously they were going to determine whether to proceed by how well phase 1 went. And so I think what you're hearing now is it's rhetoric that we've heard before from Israel at particularly low points of this war. But I think you are actually hearing more of a consistent message than perhaps some people might be willing to admit, which is that Israel's ultimate goal here is to destroy Hamas, is to prevent a post-war Gaza from being governed by Hamas. So they've been pursuing the immediate goal of releasing the hostages and then a more long-term goal of creating political, military conditions in Gaza that would prevent a Hamas resurgence and perhaps lead to the creation of some kind of alternative leadership there.
So, Ben, over the weekend, what some had thought predicated all of this yesterday were rumors and speculation that Hamas was planning another raid into Israel, much like they did on October 7th. Was there any credence to those reports here? Was that actually actionable on Hamas's part? Because you and I have talked about what's even left of Hamas. What can, and I don't want to sound glib here, what can Israel even target, strike, kill, bombard there in the Gaza Strip right now because of what they have done over the last 15 months?
Well, I think there's a difference between being severely damaged and disappearing entirely. And Hamas is somewhere in the space in between those two concepts. You did actually see in the last 24 hours with these airstrikes, I think the Israelis targeted 80 distinct targets inside Gaza. You had 4 pretty senior Hamas officials killed during these strikes. One of them was a man who was essentially fulfilling the role of prime minister. You had another man who was running the interior ministry, a third individual who was in charge of internal security. And on top of that, you also had the killing of the spokesman of Palestinian Islamic Jihad, which is an allied Islamist group of Hamas. So clearly there is still a senior leadership in Gaza that's being targeted, and the Israelis had some success last night in terms of those attacks. But I think as well that the broader question of whether Hamas has the capability to launch another October 7th. What I'm hearing right now is that they still have about 25,000 men under arms. I haven't seen any absolute verification that another October the 7th is being planned. There was reporting in the Israeli press that one of the released hostages had talked about hearing the sounds of tunnels being dug, which would suggest that Hamas was planning some kind of renewed military offensive. But I think the way to decide this is not in terms of desire, but capability. Does Hamas want to do this again? Of course it does. I think it proved on October the 7th that its ultimate goal is to destroy the state of Israel and kill as many Israelis as possible in the process. Does it have the capability of doing that? I think it would be a much harder task now, given what it's been through over the last 18 months, than it was back before that horrible day in October 2023. And I think, crucially, the Israelis are not going to make the same mistake twice. There were serious mistakes made at that time.
But Ben, is this the last gasp of Hamas? It seems like we've been here before, and they seemingly have, 9 lives like a cat, where they still remain intransigent about the hostage question and about the hostage release. And they were abiding by phase 1, though they have not done anything, from what I've seen, in retaliation to what Israel did to them over the last 48 hours here. So I just don't know what their play is, strategically speaking.
Well, they have attempted to launch rockets and failed to do so over the last few weeks. They've also launched drone attacks. They've been serviced by drones coming in from Egypt, carrying weapons and other material. So, yes, we haven't seen very serious violations of the ceasefire over the last 2 months, but neither have they kept to the letter. Okay. So, again, the question of Hamas's capability, it's still an open question, but the point I'm making is they don't have the same level of strength that they did on October the 2023 before they launched the assault that resulted in this war.
All right, Ben Cohen, we're going to have to leave it at that. Always appreciate your insight into this region of the world, and we'll talk soon.